good evening, or good night, folks. I'm your host, Simon Redhand, and welcome to Gaming Redhanded. Today, I'm going to do a video on how to plan a build in this game. See a lot of people asking questions like, oh, what's the best build to use this league, and, you know, what's top DPS and all this other stuff there, and I always hate those kind of videos. I don't like making those kind of build guides, so I don't like telling people what weapons they should be using, what's the best, what's top DPS, what's number one you should be using at all times, that kind of stuff. But I think that players should be figuring this out on their own. I think that this game here, the way you decide what you're going to build is not too difficult, because there's not too many damage types to even work with, right? So we'll go look at some guns here and just kind of pick them out real quick. So if I were to start, I would break weapons into two types. Either they're going to be weapon damage, or they're going to be elemental damage. And then there are a few other subsets you can look at to kind of multiply your damage, right? So if you're doing weapon damage, you can focus on either weak point damage or critical strike and critical strike damage. For elemental damage, you can focus on scaling elemental damage and status damage. There are two special elemental types, which is the DE Jaws, which actually allows you to crit. And there's also the corrosion shotgun, which also allows you to crit power surge. But by and large, for the most part, elemental damage cannot crit. So planning any crit build around that is kind of deciding what you're going to do. Like, you have Dual Fury here, which is a damage over time weapon, but this does have potential to build as a weapon damage weapon. And you're not going to be scaling the burn damage at all. You're going to be focusing entirely on the proc that happens when you proc the burn, which is here. So if you look at this weapon here, this one that's kind of interesting here, right? The last shot of each magazine inflicts one stack of burn. If all projectiles hit, inflict an initial stack of burn, which is like, okay, that's the elemental side of it. Now the next half of it is after hitting an enemy with all projectiles 4 times, enter a special burn state where you lose some HP and you don't fall down below 0. Attack plus 20%, vulnerability plus 10%, right? Hitting an enemy affected by burn with all projectiles has a 50% chance to refill the bullets. Double barrel shotguns do a crazy amount of damage. So if you get this to proc over and over again, you can burst some things down. So this is one of the few weapons that is elemental, but you can't ignore everything about this and just build on the bullet damage, because it's going to burn regardless. You just have to hit all the stacks. That's just a matter about being close to the enemy, and you will hit all the projectiles on there. So you don't have to worry about this. This is a self buff, which you can build off of using, there are certain mods that help you build off of that. And then you can use this key note here to build on the fact that you will rapid fire. So this thing, you would get mods and you'd build magazine capacity and stuff like that, and you can get this up to like 4 or 5 rounds. And you can get to a point where you can chain this off, and it'll trigger like 6-7 times in a row, and it's quite a bit of damage, right? So if you're able to understand like what these keywords are looking for you to do, you can figure out different ways to build these things that aren't immediately obvious, right? And a lot of people sit there and they look at shrapnel and it's like, oh, this is the best damage build, but it's not that it's the best. It's just it requires the least amount of thought to put together, right? That's what I would qualify that as. It's the reason why a lot of people gravitate to it, is that it's very simple to get going. I don't really like using training dummies too much, because training dummies will give you these inaccurate numbers where it's like, all right, every time you drop your clip in there, it's giving you 200k DPS or 400k DPS, and it looks great on YouTube and all that stuff. But the reality is, like, what's your real time on target? What's your real damage like on a boss that's moving around and you have to move around and all that good stuff, right? I think what's important is, like, if you have a build that you want to use, understanding what its potential damage values are and how to build it is probably your best way to go about using those weapons, right? And what I used to do that is a little guide here, a document that popped up last season that someone put a lot of effort into, and it would do Maris. I think he's got a YouTube channel also. He's got quite a bit of subscribers there. It's actually here. I'll link it for folks in the comments there. And this is what I kind of use to plan my builds out. I don't believe there are any like best builds right now. There's a lot of stuff that takes more effort to put together, but I firmly believe that if there's any gun you actually want to use, as long as you understand where the damage is coming from, you can pretty much build it and make it work in this game. provided you have the controllers, of course, to actually go farm out the mods necessary, right? Now, right now I'm using Unstable Bomber, so I'll probably use that as an example, the template. But you could pretty much do this with any gun you want, right? Just a bit of understanding how this thing works. It breaks down all the mods by where they're available. This information is actually available in game, but this document makes it available on this in one spot, so it's easier to understand. So you don't have to go and open every dungeon on your own. It tells you which mode drops it, so normal mode, hard mode, pro mode, or all three, depending on if it has all three black dots on there or colored dots on there. And it also tells you what aspect it drops in, right? Like sometimes, even though it drops in normal mode, it also includes everything else. It includes the epic version and the blue version and all that stuff there. So reality is, when you're doing this, I would only look at hard and pro mode, but even then I would probably only look at pro mode when it comes to target farming it, because the hard mode and normal mode, even though it will drop other things also, whereas the pro mode does get hyper specific. So the important thing to understand is what stats you're looking for, right? What I would say is everyone is kind of trying to gravitate towards resonance mods. These mods here will add stacking buffs that kind of stack on top of each other, and this is probably the best scaling you're going to get, right? And how it works is you can have two of these stats as it's reading here, and every build can kind of build on it, and you're going to be looking for either elemental damage and crit damage. If you're playing an elemental build that can crit, you're going to look for elemental damage and weak point damage, or crit damage and weak point damage, right? So those are the combinations you're kind of looking for. Every build can make use of this, right? Because every build can crit, every build can hit weak spots, etc., right? Also, what you'll notice here are build specific mods, like I'll say Frost Vortex or Bulleye. All this means is that it will target that damage. Now it's hit or miss whether or not you want this to be in your build, because if you keep stuff generic, then that means you can swap out other weapons and other blueprints. But if you do hyper specific stuff like Power Surge, that means it only works for the Power Surge. But what I've noticed in the past is if it rolls a specific tag, it does do more damage. I mean, not more damage, it does scale higher in terms of what its values are going to be. So it is worthwhile to get the specific ones, especially in the weapon slot, right? What else here? I don't think there's anything else on this page that's worth kind of covering. Let's see on this side. Oh, this is just telling you the talents. This is ranking them best to worst. So you can go through here and kind of decide for yourself what you're looking for. This in brackets, it says talents. This is the sub role suffix. This is what it would be called. So when you get the mod to drop, let me see if I have some in my inventory real quick. It says Elemental Havoc, and in brackets it says Precision. This one here, it says Precision. What else do we have here? This one here, Deviation Expert. In brackets it says Talents. This is what it's talking about. Anytime you have those brackets in there, you see this one doesn't have it, but this one does. These are the same mods, but this is telling you that it has targeted mods on there, right? That's another thing you can look towards when you're doing your mod hunting. So how I usually use this chart here, the most efficient way I found is to go through here, the first mod section of the document. I'll link in the comments. It kind of groups all the mods that are available, and I usually start with the weapon side. So right now I'm doing Unstable Bomber. These are the only 4 mods that Unstable Bomber can really make use of, right? It's Unstable Bomber inflicts heavy attack, which is a stagger. When triggering Unstable Bomber, automatically refill 10% of your magazine. For every 1% crit rate, Unstable Bomber deals 0.5% more damage. Triggering Unstable Bomber grants Unstable Bomber damage plus 4% for 3 seconds. Now, and it stacks 6 times. These are the only 2 I would even consider using. And then this one requires an extra bit of math where there's a threshold where this becomes better than this depending on your crit rate. From the start, this is better than this one here, even if you're using the DE jaws, because you need a minimum amount of crit rate to surpass this one here, right? So this takes time to build up. This is always active, but you're not going to be able to get the crit rate on your build to surpass this from the beginning. So it's better to use this one until you hit that threshold. This one is fully stacked up, 6 stacks, you get 24% increased damage. In order for Reckless Bomber to surpass this, you need at least 48% chance to crit to be equal to it. 49% chance to crit to be better than this one, right? So it's part of the calculations you have to kind of keep in mind, right? You could do this for any build, any gun that you're looking at here to figure out what mods you're looking for. So what I usually do is I start off with my weapon. I look at this and I'm like, you know what? These are the only 2 ones I need. I already have this. I have this also. So I basically went with that. That's what I'm starting off with. Then after that, I go to each individual sub part one by one, right? There's not a lot of options that you really need to worry about. You just have to look for stuff that works for your build. I played in the first season, so I know what I like using, what I don't like using. This one here is rather strong. A lot of people like using Deviation Expert. I do not. I don't like cutting off my range. I notice in Prime Wars not being able to hit targets from afar. Some people do like it, right? This one here is what I've been using for the most part, is Fateful Strike. It turns off your weak point damage, but you get flat crit rate and crit damage, which you need if you're doing a crit build, because it's very hard to actually build crit rate in this game. So the few sources that you are able to get high numbers from, that's what I pretty much use. When I was using Power Surge, I was able to get to about 80% crit chance. My unique chest piece also gives me the crit chance, so that's pretty much the only places you're really able to pull from, right? So here I'm using Fateful Strike for the helmet. Nothing else really matters. I'm not even gonna look at the rest of the stuff here. What's next? Gonna look for the mask. What's gonna go in the mask? The mask has targeted mods for your build. So this is again where you're gonna be looking for your whatever you're focusing on: Frost Vortex, Power Burn, Shrapnel, whatever. Unstable Bomber only has 2 options: point detonation and delayed blast. Delayed blast gives you increased damage every hit after the bomb's ultimate damage. However, you cannot use this on DE Jaws, and the reason why you can't use this is simple. When you look at DE Jaws, the blueprint here, every 4 seconds critical hit counts as 1 shot for the above purpose for Unstable Bomber. After sorry, 1 second. Unstable Bomber is triggered every 4 seconds after 4 shots. Critical hits count as 1 shot for the above purpose. But then what you're looking at here is this: is that the base Unstable Bomber lasts 0.1 second, right? So there is no way you're gonna get 5 shots off before 0.1 second triggers. The only gun that can make use of that mod properly is, I believe, here it is Little Jaws, and that's because Little Jaws adds a 0.3 second delay to the Unstable Bomber. And this is a different build you'll be building here. You start using Little Jaws and you want to use the delayed blast. It's an entirely different build style you're going for. This build style is heavy elemental damage scaling, and you're scaling the final explosion, right? Whereas here you cannot delay your Unstable Bomber on this build. So you cannot even use delayed blast, so it makes what you're going to use for your mass slot very simple. You're going to be losing point detonation, which is when Unstable Bomber hits only 1 enemy. Unstable Bomber's final damage is plus 25%. So that's what if I imagine what it is, because I haven't done the calculations myself and all the micro math. It's basically that bonus is coming into place after all your calculations, if that translation is correct, right? So your mask, you only have 1 choice: Unstable Bomber, right? You go over your top section here. There's a few things you can use. What I'm currently using is more of a defensive mod here. If I go to my gear and show you guys, I was using this last season. So damage reduction plus 20%, healing received plus 20% when HP is below 30%. This is what I'm currently using because this is the best I currently found. But what if I were to decide and look at something different to use? We go through this list here and see what's available. You have flat health, can't go wrong with that. It's also very hard to find flat health by itself. You have resist advantage. What else? When out of combat, gain 1 stack of damage reduction every 5%. Gain 1 stack of damage reduction 5% every 10 seconds. Effect stacks up to 5 times. 1 stack is removed when hit. So you basically get 25% damage reduction, and every time you hit, it sheds some of this. This is a pretty good defensive layer. When your HP is above 70%, the head area is no longer repoint. This is a PvP mod because monsters do not target your head, or if they do, it's not intentionally. So while you probably could put this on and like, oh yeah, I resist headshots, they're not trying to. Most monsters are punching you, right? When using a healing shot, damage reduction for 40%. This is another good one that I would consider using if I got it. When using a healing shot, movement speed 20% for 2 seconds, the magazine, and refill the magazine from the inventory. This is also very good for making sure you never have to reload. You can time this, and it's basically substituting your reload animation for your healing animation. However, it's one of those mods where it's like, do you want to use your healing cooldown in order to reload your weapon faster? There's certain guns where this is useful on. I would say the LMG is one of them, a gun that has a long reload time. I don't think the pistol is one of those guns that needs this, right? The pistol is very fast reload time. It's not insanely fast, but it's fast enough where you don't have to consider something like this, right? What's next is when using when out of combat, gain 1 stack of safe haven every 5 seconds. Effect can stack up to 5 times. With every 5 damage received, remove 1 stack of safe haven to get 8% shield for 3%. This is also fairly strong. So you get, this goes up to 5 times, and then every time you receive 5 damage, it removes 1 stack of safe haven to gain 8% shield. So that's what, a 40% of your HP shield. That's what I'm assuming it's going to give you. You're gonna get 5 damage pretty fast. So like any singular hit you're gonna take is gonna do that. Now I don't know how this works. I don't know if it just takes the first, like if you have to hit 5 times for it to all go off, or if you get a hit for a big, say 100 damage hit, it's just gonna give you all 5 stacks at once. This is one that I wanted to test out, but I never got a good one last season to properly put on and test, so I never got a chance to use it correctly. Head-on conflict is also pretty decent. Having enemies within 7 meters around you grants you a 10% damage reduction. Taking melee damage from enemies grants you 10% damage reduction and additional. So every enemy does, well, the majority of enemies hit melee, right? When I was using my corrosion build shotgun, I was using this mod. The flat 10% damage is noticeable, and then getting an extra 10% if you get hit. It's a very strong mod, right? But then there's other mods that are equally good, right? So you get damage reduction 20% and healing received plus 20% or below. That's not a bad one, but I don't like the 30% threshold. I don't like I wouldn't leave my life that low to begin with. That's one-shot territory, right? So your life is that low. I don't think you're gonna survive whatever hits. It's gonna hit you that life anyway, so you're gonna go down. But hey, maybe you could, right? Maybe it could give you a little bit of a saving grace. And then when HP is lower than 60%, purge all deviated states. When I look at this, what I like considering using is rejuvenating is good. When HP is above 60%, a kill recovers 15% HP loss. This is good when you're grinding on the overworld. In dungeons, it's not so much useful, but on the outside map, it's very useful for saving on those your HP potions. But when I choose something to stick to, it usually is the one I showed you originally, which is, where is it at? So the healing shot here, and then also the reduction, this one here. So when I get a chance though, I'm going to be switching back to this one here when I do find a better one. And then if I do find a yellow version of this, I will start using this one here to test out how strong this HP mod is, right? Right now, I'm using this one because this is all I have, and I don't want to use any controllers or find something better just yet. I will by next week though, when the promos open up. We over to the bottoms. The bottoms don't have, I don't think they have too many things that were good in my opinion here. If I remember correctly, let's take a look. As you can see, life is everywhere. Crit damage, I believe this is what I'm using no matter what, just because crit damage is very hard to skill also. So each critical hit by a non-melee weapon grants 5% crit damage up to 45%. The effect is removed on next reload. This is what I've been using last season with my corrosion. It's what I'm using now. It's probably what I will continue to use in this slot here. Next is the gloves. The gloves is another important spot. This is the mod I never take off. Is crit rate 10%, crit damage 15%. However, I did use this one first because, like I said, there's a certain threshold you're trying to hit with your crit rate, and until you get your double crit mod on your blueprint, this mod is technically better just because of that 5%. because if you don't crit, you don't do crit damage, right? So you have to use this for a while until you get to a point where you're like, your crit damage, your crit rate is high enough. I feel like that rate for me was around 65% or so. But then I can switch to that, right? Switch to the crit amplifier. And then for shoes, everyone pretty much uses covered advance. This mod here confuses me because on paper it seems too strong, right? Take no damage within 4 seconds, grants you 20% melee, weapon, and status damage. For up to 30 seconds, the effect is reset when the duration ends. It seems too powerful for what it's giving, because it's very easy to go through without taking any damage. But, you know, until someone figures out otherwise, this is pretty much what everybody ends up using. I, however, like not needing to reload, so I've been using Ruthless Reaper for a while. I've been using Ruthless Reaper since last season because I do like just never reloading, right? And this one here is after 2 kills, refill 100% of your magazine from your reserves. And in terms of ads and stuff like that here, Ruthless Reaper helps me basically never have to stop firing, no matter what weapon I'm using. So I've been using this for a while. If I do serious boss farming, I may switch to covered advance, but even then, I still find Ruthless Reaper to be very good. And what else here? I think that's it. I mean, there's other things here you can consider. Stuff like having no enemies around you. If you're using a sniper build and you're not worried about being hit, you can use that over covered advance. But yeah, it's very hard to not use covered advance, right? So yeah, I think that on top of like understanding your mods, like what mods you're going to use, you're also going to take a check at your Cradle buffs, right? There's not too many Cradle buffs here. Everything is pretty straightforward. I'm using a pistol, so I have to use the handgun enhancement. I like using the tactical item thing here. So if after using a tactical item, damage against grade 1 bosses plus 25%, I throw random Molotovs and stuff like that just to kind of trigger this thing, but I don't have to spam it that often, and it's 15 seconds. I also use the drone when I also use stuff like the turrets, stuff like that. So these all help towards that. I use the anti-regen pistol because of the void balance mobs. Using this makes it very easy to get through the dungeon when these guys show up, because they do show up in dungeons now. I used to use this, but I took it out because I lower my weapon damage, and I'm focusing on the blast itself, so I don't care about my weapon damage going up. I use this instead, hitting a weak point, status damage plus 25% for 3 seconds. This advantage berry is very strong. It has a cooldown, but after hitting weak point or reloading, grants you a shield equal to 30% of your max HP. It doesn't reflect it on your UI anywhere, but when this is active, it doesn't break covered advance, so it makes covered advance even stronger. There's also first round blast, which I do use sometimes. Even though I have Ruthless Reaper on, I don't get the trigger this often. I can force this to trigger by just reloading on my own, right? I keep this on. Well, I have a different build. This is the build I switch to, right? When I'm in a group, I put this one on. When I'm solo, I put this one on. And basically, this reduces durability loss when you're in a party. When you're solo, you do more damage when you're solo, right? So I switch back and forth. I was grouping a little bit, so I had this one on. What else is here? This is another one. After a unit takes damage from unstable bomber, if the unit takes damage from the bomber within 3 seconds, the final damage is increased. So basically, if you chain unstable bomber, it does increase damage, right? There's not too many options here, so the Cradle is not something you have to overthink. Just put on the stuff that affects your build and makes sense to you. And then Deviation Master is very strong. You can kind of swap out Master Tactician for Deviation Master if you like, right? And that's pretty much all there is to it. The other thing to consider is just after you pick the mods you're going to be using in each slot, because there's not a crazy amount of variety, you're then going to be worried about these substats here. And what the rule I've been working with is I choose 2 stats to make sure that I always see present on my mods. I have not been rolling mods right now, so let me see. I think I have some mods from last season that are here. I should have something from last season. Was it this one here? It's hard to find because I'm not using my power surge up there. So this one here is one mod I was using here. This one here maxed out power surge damage. I mean critical strike damage. And I kept using it because it had critical strike damage and it had damage against normal enemies on there. So I'm like, all right, that's pretty good. So to me, it's like as long as there's 2 mods worth using, I generally kind of try to stick to using it. What else I have? I think I had a good mod for my mask somewhere. You check and see. Here it is. Crit amplifier. So I got this to drop with both deal 1 instance of elemental damage, gain crit damage, and then deal instance of weak point damage, get elemental damage. And I ended up trying to enhance this one up here, but I wasn't successful. But this is the one I rocked with because it rolled 2 good mods that I could actually use. And that's kind of just the idea here. When you're finding the mods, you're just looking for at least 2 mods that are usable for your build, and then you're hoping that at least one of those 2 mods are, I would say, at least epic, right? So if you look at the mods here, the skill color here, I would say before you start enhancing it, make sure that at least one of them is epic, one of them is blue, right? So you have less taps you need to do in order to get it to max, right? I think that the reason why I went deep with this one, even though they didn't meet the criteria, is because these 2 resident mods are rare in general to get to work, and they were both blue, I think. And I ended up hitting like everything else except the I hit the first one once, I got epic, and then the other ones I just hit 2 times each or whatever, and then I ended up bringing those up instead. So I wasn't able to get anyone to legendary, but you want to make sure that if you find one of these mods, how rare it is to get 2 mods that work, 2 of those residents that work together and on the same mod, that you might forego the needing to be epic rule and start rolling on it, right? That's about it. There's nothing else here. I don't think it's that difficult to make a strong build. A lot of the build DPS comes down to just the mechanical function of the gun itself, and some of these guns are just really hard to work with their playstyle, right? Like Fortress Warfare is a difficult playstyle to maneuver with just because of how Fortress Warfare works. It's not a weak gun, it's just a very hard gun to if you don't like the playstyle for it, right? Same goes with Frost Vortex, right? I don't like the way Frost Vortex works in general. I don't like the way you have to trigger Frost Vortex, so I don't really want to play it. And that's it, right? But I don't think there's any best gun or best DPS or like that. I think if you invest in weapons and understand the playstyle, how to make it work, you can make most guns viable if they're legendary. I'll go with that. The damage difference between legendary and epic is too big. Like if you look at here, I guess I'll show this before we stop. Tier preview. At 1 star, it's 322 times 5. At 5 stars, it's 402 times 5, right? You go look at the epic version of the same style gun, because all you're looking for is just the model. The DB12 doesn't have the effect. You go look at one of these, it's 289, 305 times 5. So it needs to be 2 star to match a base weapon of the gun. And when you get the 5 star, it doesn't even come close. It doesn't even come close to what the legendary is capable of, right? You see? So it's one of those things where it's like, even if you heavily invest into the DB backfire, it's never going to be on par flat damage wise with the raiding cache, because it's epic. The same way this netherrail will never be on par with the corrosion, even though there are 2 different builds going on here. So it's very hard to choose which of these guns you're going to invest in. So while as much as I like Dual Fury, the damage difference between Dual Fury and Doombringer are massive, right? I don't have Doombringer right now, so I can't show you the detailed stats. But if you look at it, like the base stats, it takes 3 stars just to equal the Doombringer, and even then you're not even equal to it. You're still below it by 1 point, right? 361, 362. So 3 starring this thing brings it up to a 1 star version of this. I don't understand why they chose this direction, because these guns are not on par with each other. I think that every one of these blueprints should be able to go to legendary, except for the green ones. Right, the blue ones all have their own little effects, right? So I felt like sticking to a purple weapon. This should be able to go straight up to legendary version of Dual Fury, which brings the base damage up to match. And I think that's a huge oversight and a huge bottleneck. Around, I'll say bottleneck. I would say it pigeonholes people into certain builds because of the fact that the epic version cannot be put on par with the legendary versions that exist, regardless of the fact that they're completely different builds. Like this is shrapnel, this is power surge. Like the base damage of this gun is just higher, right? Now you might be able to make this work with that, but I wouldn't, right? Anyway, that's gonna be it for now, guys. As always, I appreciate you guys for giving me your time. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below if you agree with me, disagree with what I was saying there. That's it. Have yourselves a good morning. And this is the video you watch me today. Good afternoon or good night.